you won't be surprised to hear, because you may be among them, it turns out the American people don't love watching Donald Trump and Elon Musk take an absolute wrecking ball to the federal government. I mean, today we saw massive protests right here in Washington, D.C., and also all across the country. You can see some of the photos on our screen. We saw protests in big cities, in small towns, and at state capitals. We saw just how pissed off people are about what's happening right now. And who could blame them? I mean, we just learned that Elon Musk's Doge crew is trying to get access to personal taxpayer data at the IRS. So basically, the world's richest man and his band of 20-something cronies want access to your personal data. They want access to your tax returns, your addresses, your employment information, your banking details, and your social security numbers. I mean, this is the kind of issue that hits home for all of us. I'm sure it hits home for you, because most of us pay taxes, right? Just like most of us fly in on airplanes. And today, unbelievably, there was another major commercial airline incident. A Delta plane that took off from Minneapolis flipped over when it was attempting to land in Toronto. Nobody was killed, but at least 17 people were injured. And of course, it's just the latest in a series of air incidents since Trump was sworn in. And since an Army helicopter and an American Airlines plane collided right here in Washington, killing 67 people. Well, today, just 19 days after that tragedy, we are also getting new details about the Trump administration's purge of hundreds of critical air safety workers at the FAA. And I'm going to go into more detail also with somebody who knows a lot about it in just a moment. But the larger point is this. Donald Trump and Elon Musk are screwing around with government in all sorts of ways that impact you personally, and in ways that impact our national security and our safety more broadly. And in that process, they are teaching us a whole lot about all of the ways that government actually keeps us safe. For example, I mean, when the U.S. military needs to deploy more nuclear warheads on its planes and submarines to defend us, do you know who actually holds the components for those weapons? Who puts them together, makes sure they're safe, and delivers them to the Pentagon? Well, most of that work is actually done by the same people who also refurbish old nuclear weapons and dismantle the retired ones. And it all happens at one plant on the Sandy Plains outside of Amarillo, Texas, called the Pantex plant. It's where the employees and contractors for the Department of Energy are constantly inspecting and outfitting America's nuclear weapons with high explosives, as well as their cores of highly radioactive uranium and plutonium. All of this highly secretive, highly dangerous work is run by the Department of Energy's National Nuclear Security Administration. They oversee the U.S. nuclear stockpile and its components, not just at Pantex, but at an entire network of plants, labs, and bases across the country. The NNSA does all of that and transports nuclear material on U.S. highways using a highly trained and heavily armed fleet of trucks and vehicles. And this is all overseen by career staff with very, very specific expertise. For some of them, decades of it. It's also the sort of government function that we don't think about all the time. I hope you don't think about all the time. But it's always working in the background. It has to work because you can't mess around with the people who handle our nuclear weapons. Well, I mean, at least you thought you can't.
The latest bit of information coming in from the National Nuclear Security Agency, which is tasked with overseeing and building the nation's nuclear weapons stockpile. Their notices have gone out with termination for probationary employees effective immediately.
That's right. So as part of its purge of government employees, Elon Musk and his merry band of young Doge axemen unilaterally fired 350 workers at the agency responsible for safeguarding nuclear arms components. And almost immediately, they realized they'd made a terrible mistake.
NBC News has obtained an email sent to employees of the National Nuclear Security Administration. It says in part the termination letters for some NNSA probationary employees are being rescinded, adding that officials do not have a good way to get in touch with those personnel.
Do not have a good way to get in touch. Okay, that's right. Under Elon Musk's eye, the Trump White House fired a chunk of the NNSA workforce, and one of the hardest hit offices was the Pantex plant that I was just talking about, near Amarillo, Texas. They saw about 30% of the cuts. You know, that's the plant where employees work on reassembling warheads, one of the most sensitive jobs across the nuclear weapons enterprise, with the highest levels of clearance. But now the geniuses who let those employees go can't figure out how to unfire the people it had just locked out of government buildings and email. You literally can't make it up sometimes. The director of the Arms Control Association told the AP, quote, "The DOJ people are coming in with absolutely no knowledge of what these departments are responsible for." So yes, they are messing around with the people who literally handle our nuclear bombs. That's what Donald Trump and Elon Musk are doing. Now, at the same time, the Trump administration is firing hundreds of employees at the FAA, just weeks after the deadliest U.S. air disaster in decades. Those firings reportedly include personnel hired for FAA radar, landing and navigational aid maintenance, as well as a technician who was working on a critical cruise missile defense radar system. Now, as I mentioned, there's already been a spike in serious and fatal crashes since Trump took office and since the FAA's chief resigned, in accordance with the demands of Elon Musk. And that list doesn't even include the latest. That Delta plane that crash landed and flipped on the runway in Toronto. That flight left from Minneapolis under FAA supervision, though it was being directed at the time of the crash by their Canadian counterparts. Even still, lots of Americans are understandably wondering, you may be too, if Trump's FAA is still able to keep air travel safe, just as more firings of critical air safety personnel are underway. So yes, people are pissed, and it is not hard to see why. And as we watch these protests play out across the country, we're also watching a metaphorical ticking time bomb in a country where we suddenly have to worry about the safety of our air travel and of our literal nuclear bombs. Starting us off tonight is David Spiro. He's the president of the Professional Aviation Safety Specialist Unit. David, thank you so much for taking the time here. I mentioned this, and I know you've probably been answering this question from friends and family as well. And people are understandably a little freaked out right now about air travel, and we're simultaneously seeing all of these layoffs, these firings that are happening under Donald Trump and Elon Musk, as well as what feels like an increase in incidents in the air. I just wonder how you make sense of what's happening, that all happening simultaneously.
Well, thank you for having me on. It's been a difficult few weeks, obviously, and our hearts go out to the passengers on the plane today, the crew, the first responders. Happily, at the moment, there's been no fatalities. So hopefully that stays the way it is. I think that it's important to note that the U.S. air traffic control system is safe, and our members are a key reason why that's the case. We work with integrity, we work with skill, and we have a deep background in how to maintain the air traffic control system and how to oversee it. But as you pointed out, just this past Friday, about 300 folks, 400 people got the axe on St. Valentine's Day, right? Out to dinner and enjoying a nice evening, and find out they lost their job. We didn't get any notice from the FAA. At this point right now, we don't know if it's 300, 400, or 1,000 because... So
it could be, I just want to pause on that. It could be way more than the 350 that have been reported.
It could be. They haven't told us who it is. And as far as we're concerned, the inspectors and the technicians, we have probationary inspectors and technicians that could possibly have gotten the axe, but we don't know that for certain. All that we're getting right now is our members reaching out to us and telling us, hey, I lost my job. And we're talking about people that support the entire air traffic control system by virtue of the support work that they do. So let me start out and talk about aeronautical information specialists. They are a skilled group of people that create charts, navigational processes, a performance-based navigation where aircraft can fly in a lot more efficiently. It takes a long time to develop those skills. There's at least 30 of them that are probationary employees in the FAA that we represent. And quite honestly, if they're gone, who's going to create that product? And the work that our aviation safety assistants do for our inspectors to make sure that they can actually go out and ramp airplanes and check on pilots and airworthiness of aircraft. They do all of that stuff because they have these support groups behind them.
You mentioned some of the skills, and maybe those are the main ones for people to understand. But for people who are watching who aren't experts, for all of these layoffs, and it was already understaffed to begin with, what is the impact on airports and the ability to safely land planes? How should people understand that if these cuts continue?
Well, if these cuts continue, I don't know how far into the bone you can go before you have to start looking at. Let's look at navigational aids or radars or automation systems that air traffic controllers use, communications that they use to get the airplanes up in the air and down to their destination and people there safely. If we don't have the right people with the right skill sets working in these locations, or if they're off doing something else because they don't have that support group anymore, then quite honestly, we're going to have delays. There's always backup systems, but if I don't have the right person in the right place to be able to restore a system like happened in Chicago last year, where we didn't have anyone on duty that could intervene in the automation system, where they were having errors coming through and controllers couldn't tell what the planes were. So we had to stop. We had stops at 5 airports in the Chicago area. That sort of thing is because you don't have the right person in the right place. Now, if we're going to have to leave the work that we do and go off somewhere else to take care of work that someone else was doing for us to make sure that we can do our jobs, then that's going to make it even more difficult.